Welcome back to the Dark Reading News Desk here at Black Hat USA. Joining us now is Omer Zucker, product team leader with Pentera. Omer, thank you for joining us today on the Dark Reading News Desk.
Thank you. Really glad to be here.
We're talking about exposure management, which is very much in the ether. Gartner most recently described this as a process of a combination, really, of attack surface mapping, vulnerability assessment, and validation. Tell us how much this aligns with Pentera's own vision of exposure management.
Cool, sure. So, I would like to start saying that in the last Gartner Summit, we in Pentera as a company, we were extremely overwhelmed since it felt like our entire work in the past few years actually consolidated and presented by Gartner. And specifically in some of the presentation, there was a certain slide that talked about Gartner's 3 pillars of exposure management, specifically about the attack surface, vulnerability, and validation. So I would like just to say 2 words about each of these. When we are talking about attack surface, as we see it in Pentera, we are talking about the point of view of a real attacker, and I will point out the real word. It's really important here, both from the outside and from the inside, externally and internally, and it is really important to see this high-level overview. The second one is vulnerability. When we are talking about vulnerabilities, we are talking about prioritization. Prioritization starting from our efforts, our resources, and last but not least, the vulnerabilities themselves. So this is really tricky how you treat these vulnerabilities and CVEs and how you actually take and leverage the attacker behavior in order to exploit them. The third one is validation, and I want to come back to the word real. CISOs get lots of information, lots of theory, lots of tools that they can use, but eventually, as we see in Pentera, the CISO need to understand the reality. And here comes the real word. The reality of the security posture, the reality of his or her security controls, and how he or her actually validate these security controls. And the key word here, how we say in Pentera, is exploitability.
It's an interesting combination of disciplines that converge with exposure management. What do you see as the biggest challenge within exposure management?
So I see 2 challenges. The first one is the mindset. The CISO is now need to think a bit differently. If until now we discussed about SIEM, SOAR, XDR, and these technologies that we all know from the past decade, now we are talking about something new. And the CISO will have to look at exposure management and actually translate it to concrete actions. And this is connect to the second point I want to say. These concrete actions, what are they? It's a single platform. These are tools. Exposure management is currently a program that comprise of lots of processes and capabilities. So we need to actually translate them into something really, really concrete.
Vendors and their customers, of course, are always looking for as complete a solution as they can possibly get. I'm curious from your perspective, what is missing in the exposure management space that would allow security professionals to prioritize better or focus more on these exploitable security gaps? Can you address that?
Yeah. So in 2 words, I would say focus and context.
Okay.
So if I'm a CISO, I need to engage, for example, 500 or 5,000 vulnerabilities in a really short period of time. And for that, I need to be really, really focused. Okay? In order to be really focused, I need to have a context for each one of these vulnerabilities. When I say context, I mean exploitability. As we know, in the past 3 years, from different surveys, only 3 to 5% of all CVEs in the world are actually exploitable. And we see it a lot with our customers in Pentera. So our approach is try and take these CVEs and vulnerabilities and actually test them by their exploitability and to see if it's actually works from the attacker perspective. And this gap, this mindset need to be approached.
I mean, it's an interesting combination of both. When you talk about context, there's a prioritization issue. It strikes me a lot of what risk management is about. Do you see risk management and exposure management as fundamentally different?
So not necessarily. It can be part of, for example, like risk management will be part of exposure management. It will be one category or one part of it in which CISO will have to prioritize within their exposure management, but eventually the risk will be something more tangible that is related to their business, I would say. So these are kind of combination of two different efforts that you need to take into consideration.
Thanks for that. Leaked credentials aren't a new thing to the industry by any stretch, nor are threat intelligence services. Talk about what's new in Pentera's approach.
Yeah. So actually we've just launched a new module which is called Credential Exposure. And as we know, and you say so, threat intelligence tools are here for the past decade, right? And they're not going to be gone, and we all use them, and they're really, really valuable. But the question, and this is this question, I think it was also popped up in the Gartner Summit. So I have threat intelligence services, and I consume them as a CISO. Okay, I get lots of information. What am I doing with that information at the end of the day? The output that comes out of these threat intelligence services, is it really actionable? So it really depends on the use case. How we approach it in Pentera, we say, okay, we think it's actionable, but let's take it and make with it something. So we're actually taking these threat intel vendors and information gathering, we're push them into the product, and then we're trying to leverage these credentials. It means that we're actually trying to validate them against external services from the outside, as I mentioned, externally, and from the inside, we are trying to engage with the Holy of Holies, the Active Directory.
Sure.
So eventually, we're trying to make this actionable threat intelligence really actionable.
With that in mind, the volume of threats, of threat intelligence, threatens to be overwhelming. The volumes have increased exponentially. What role do you see for automation in helping security practitioners and SOCs in general deal with the flood of threats that are coming their way?
Yeah, this is a really good question, since each and every customer or prospect we are engaging saying the same things. Okay, so we'll use different pen testing techniques and personnel once a year, and they can cover 5 to 10 to 50 hosts by different methods. But as we know today, specifically when we are talking about large enterprise, you need to cover the entire organization. We're talking about tens of and the hundreds of thousands of IPs, and for that, you need to have automation and continuous validation all the time.
Omar, real quickly, what are some good first steps for customers who are considering exposure management as part of their service portfolio?
Yeah, so first of all, changing the mindset, as I mentioned, expanding your arsenal as a CISO. Okay, if we talked about the legacy and the defensive security control, so now we have another new player in the market. And second of all, to take concrete action in terms of budget, resource allocation, and so on, in order to adopt these new programs and capabilities.
Omar, great stuff on exposure management. Thanks for joining us today on the Dark Reading News Desk. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
We've been talking with Omar Zucker of Pentera. It's the Dark Reading News Desk here at Black Hat 2022, coming to you live from the Mandalay Bay Hotel in Las Vegas.